Thank you, Mr. Perlmutter, Chairman Perlmutter. I appreciate your leadership in holding this very, very important hearing, and I appreciate the sentiments of Chair Waters in talking about the need to tackle this in a bipartisan way. I think we can, we should. It's overdue. This is a huge matter. There is some discussion about what's the right approach here, more harmonized regulation. I think there's a private sector innovation point to be made. It's not black and white, it can be both. But Mr. Newgard, can you give us an example of some private sector innovation that has made the financial system more secure from cyber attacks?
Private sector.
Private sector innovation.
Okay, so of course our core providers, those would be private sector, and we really rely, as I mentioned before, rely on them for that innovation almost solely. And the fintechs are coming online. That's private sector. So, by the way, we pay about 51,000.
Sorry to interrupt, but they are providing increasingly innovative solutions for your institution?
Yes, absolutely. We want them to do more.
Let me ask you about regulation then. Are there regulatory requirements that cause institutions like yours, smaller banks, to shift more resources on regulatory compliance rather than investing in cybersecurity and strengthening cybersecurity? In other words, are regulatory compliance burdens hampering your ability to invest in financial technology cybersecurity?
Absolutely. The increased regulation makes it very difficult for small banks, that's why to scale. That's why you're seeing it.
Let me get into this issue of core. Okay, sorry, sir. Let me get into this issue of core processors, and I've heard this from my constituent community institutions. The take it or leave it kind of contract approach that they express vociferously. They're expressing frustration with that, and I take seriously the suggestion, the recommendation from both you and Mr. James about harmonization of regulation and my colleagues' legislation to bring these third-party vendors under supervision. I'm open to that. But my question is, the problem appears to be inadequate competition. How do we get more competition in financial technology and among the core processors so you have greater choices of contracts for these services, which would not only bring down costs potentially, but also encourage greater private sector innovation in this space? And is it a concern that more regulation on them could potentially have the opposite effect of actually encouraging greater consolidation among core providers, which we don't want?
So we pay $51,500 that we budget a month in cost for our core provider with Fiserv. It's very expensive. We rely on them for technology, but the problem is they don't keep up with innovation. So then fintech comes in and provides that solution, but they're very unproven, very new, and they don't have the regulatory guidance. So they are at risk for cyber attacks.
If I could shift over to Mr. James, because I'm very sympathetic to the problem that MDIs face and other small institutions face. And in your testimony, you talked about needing to level the playing field. And my last question here is, how do we level the playing field for MDIs and small banks? I assume you're able to, through the tax code, deduct your investments in technology as a business expense. But clearly, the economies of scale of your larger competitors puts you at a disadvantage. Besides the regulatory harmonization, what else would help MDIs and community banks level the playing field and access the technology you need?
So, yeah, Mr. Barr, I think it's a great question. I think some of the answer there lies in regulation, but some of it does lie in competition and being able to access competitors to these companies. So oftentimes what happens is when a good competitor comes along to one of the big core processors, they'll go and buy that company rather than allow them to grow enough to be able to provide services to more of our institutions. And so, I think we really need to look at those contracts, and we need to look at encouraging more competition so that we can move to different providers that are more flexible and more secure and provide our customers with better service.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has